Early spring, 1820. A 14-year-old farm boy looks for a quiet place to pray. It would be his first uttered prayer, and that prayer would change the world. 1978. Dr. John C. Lefgren, an economics PhD employed by the State Department, spends a free afternoon in the National Archives. He's pursuing a passion, and he's just unearthed the first systematic national weather report ever made in the history of the world. At the same time, in Layton, Utah, Dr. John P. Pratt, a senior aerospace engineer with a doctorate in astronomy, takes time during his lunch break to study an early text. Dr. Pratt has become one of the world's foremost experts on ancient astronomical calendars. And as he examines this particular record, a thought suddenly occurs to him. Two men with vastly different backgrounds and fields of study. Two men pursuing different interests with different methodologies in different parts of the country. Two separate, unique paths that 3 decades later would converge. Unknown to them at the time, these two men had begun a single journey. John P. Pratt is not your typical astrophysicist. Armed with undergraduate degrees in physics and math, young John Pratt sought a PhD in astronomy from the University of Arizona.
Well, when it came time for me to do my dissertation, I was somewhat at odds with the department because they were all out doing modern astronomy, deep sky objects, super distant galaxies. I wanted to do a dissertation on the moon and exactly what was its position in ancient times, because all of the ancient calendars worldwide were based on the position of the moon.
Throughout history and across all cultures, mankind has used calendars to predict coming events, particularly the rise of seasons, vital for determining crop planting times and sustaining life.
All of these ancient calendars had one thing in common. They're based on the moon, the phases of the moon, which is a 29.5-day cycle. So they all had to come up with some sort of system to make the days come out even, like alternating 29 and 30 days. And that was something that really interested me, but apparently it didn't interest anybody else in the department.
But John did eventually earn that doctorate. He went on to teach astronomy at a state college and write computer code for the U.S. military's Minuteman missile program.
You know, people say you don't have to be a rocket scientist, but there's sometimes when it's hard enough that you do have to be a rocket scientist.
And he was a good rocket scientist. Through his career, Dr. John Pratt was a successful scientist, professor, and computer programmer. But he never lost his passion for ancient calendars, particularly religious calendars.
It was usually the priests that did the calendars. And I wanted to know all of the ones that were held sacred, whether they were Mayan, Hebrew, Chinese. I wanted to study these ancient calendars. And the calendar of Enoch is one of those.
One of the most intriguing calendars to reveal itself was found embedded in a book of ancient scripture known as the Book of Enoch. One of the lost books, Enoch was not included for canonization by the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, despite the reverence many had for it.
All who are in the heavens know what is transacted there. They know that the heavenly luminaries change not their paths, that each rises and sets regularly, every one at its proper period without transgressing the commands which they have received. They behold the earth and understand what is there transacted from the beginning to the end of it. The Book of Enoch, chapter 3, verses 1 and 2.
In the Book of Enoch, there's 7 or 8 chapters that detail exactly how to actually implement the calendar of Enoch. It was that important.
For the signs, the seasons, the years, the days, Uriel showed me the angel whom the Lord of glory appointed over all the luminaries of heaven, and in the world, that they might rule in the face of the sky, and appearing over the earth, become conductors of the days and nights. The sun, the moon, the stars, and all the ministers of heaven, which make their circuit with all the chariots of heaven. The book of Enoch, chapter 74, verses 4 through 9.
Well, when you study these chapters, you find out the main feature is every year has exactly 364 days. That comes out to be exactly 4 quarters of 13 weeks each. Every quarter starts on a Sunday. It's a very practical calendar. It's arranged with every quarter has 3 months and then 1 extra day, a holy day, which is either one of the equinoxes or solstices. And the way extra days are put in, it comes out actually more accurate than the calendar we use. So it's accurate, it's very practical, and it's sacred.
Dr. John C. Lefgren received his PhD in economics, attending the University of Helsinki as a Fulbright scholar. After serving for a number of years as a Foreign Service Officer for the U.S. State Department, he became an officer with a major bank in New York.
I've always been interested in puzzles and numbers, and I became involved in a calculation that I thought was interesting and that it could be maybe an article. I worked on it, and it evolved, and before I knew it, it turned into a book.
The book, April 6th, was published in 1980 to coincide with the 150th anniversary of the founding of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It focuses on April 6, 1830, and gives compelling reasons for the selection of that particular sacred date.
In my research, I found some primary sources in the church record which indicated that April 6, 1830 was a beautiful day. I found that interesting. I thought, well, is there another source which will give me the weather report for that day and that year?
In 1978, Dr. Lefgren, living in the Washington, D.C. area, was able to visit the National Archives. After examining roll after roll of microfilm, he eventually found just what he was looking for. In 1818, Dr. Joseph Lovell was appointed the 8th Surgeon General of the United States Army. 2 years later, in 1820, Dr. Lovell became the first Surgeon General to require regular weather reports from the medical officers of all Army posts. These reports included temperature readings, precipitation, wind reports, and sky conditions. And medical officers were also required to note the concurrent incidence of disease among the troops. Dr. Lovell intended to discover the correlation between weather and sickness so as to better prepare the armed forces. What he didn't know was that his order for these weather reports was to be the beginning of the United States Weather Bureau, now known as the National Weather Service.
I found a record in Sackett's Harbor at a barracks kept by Dr. Wheaton. And in that record, I found in 1830 that April 6th was a beautiful day, which confirmed the accounts that members of the church gave on that day.
But as Dr. Lefgren was finishing at the National Archives, he got a thought.
As I was looking at the weather records for April 6, 1830, I knew that other people had suggested that April 6, 1820 was a likely date for the first vision. I knew that Joseph had said that the weather was clear and beautiful. And I says, I can check that with these records to see if April 6, 1820 fits.
The weather records did go back to 1820, and Dr. Lefgren found the reports from Sackett's Harbor, just 80 miles from Palmyra, New York, the site of the first vision. Excited, Dr. Lefgren reviewed the records. 7 a.m. on Thursday, April 6, 1820. Cloudy skies, with winds from the northeast, and a chilly morning temperature of just 32 degrees.
In 1820, April 6 was not a good day. The day before, it snowed. The day after, sleet and rain, miserable winds. This is not a good setting for the first vision. I came to that conclusion and I says, okay, fine. My research is on April 6, 1830, and this doesn't concern my book.
Lindsay Storrs is a member of the American Meteorological Society and holds their Certified Broadcast Meteorologist seal. Her work in the field of weather has been recognized by the Associated Press.
Well, the National Weather Service actually got its primitive start with the Army back in 1820. Now, prior to that, you have people noting weather conditions here and there in their journals, but these are just scattered and not always reliable data. Then Joseph Lovell comes along with standardized mercury thermometers on every Army base in the country and a strict protocol for recording observations 3 times a day. In 1820 alone, the first year this system was implemented, we suddenly have more than 10,000 reliable weather observations. On each military post, officers are observing conditions every day, 7 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. They write down the temperature, the sky conditions, clear skies, cloudy skies, whatever the weather may be. They mark down the direction of the wind and any general remarks like noting rain or snow or especially strong winds. So you've got this very clear line of demarcation. In 1819 and before, we have maybe a few hundred scattered weather reports here and there. Then in 1820, we have this explosion of data. For the first time in world history, we actually have a national reporting system for temperatures and conditions, morning, afternoon, and evening. So I guess the point is, if you're looking for the weather in a particular place in 1819, good luck. But if you're looking for the weather in 1820, now you've got the data, because 1820 is the first time in history when we have reliable and comprehensive weather reports.
Susan Easton Black is a professor emeritus of church history and doctrine at Brigham Young University. She is also an author of several books related to Joseph Smith Jr. and the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well, in actuality, we don't know the date of the first vision. So the clue that we probably have is that Elder Bruce R. McConkie, in General Conference in April 1978, gave a magnificent address titled "The Morning Breaks as Shadows Flee." And in his address, he talked about this morning of the first vision, and then he says, quote, "the traditional date being April 6th. And so we can look at what he says, but if you were to look at historical documents we have at this point, we would not be able to nail that date so specific.
Of the 4 accounts published or recounted by Joseph Smith himself, the one most familiar to LDS Church members is the 1838 account, found in the Pearl of Great Price and known as Joseph Smith History. In this passage of Scripture, the prophet describes his confusion regarding the right church to join and his reading of James 1:5.
At length, I came to the conclusion that I must either remain in darkness and confusion, or else I must do as James directs, that is, ask of God. So, in accordance with this, my determination to ask of God, I retired to the woods to make the attempt. It was on the morning of a beautiful, clear day, early in the spring of 1820. Joseph Smith History, verses 13 and 14.
There are several accounts of Joseph Smith's first vision. Some of the accounts were dictated by him. There's only one account that actually mentions it's a beautiful, clear day. It's, in this early spring.
As I looked at the weather record for Sackett's Harbor on April 6th, 1820, I found that there was nothing there that was beautiful. It was cold, it was wet the day before, it snowed the day after, there was sleet. It's not the day of the first vision. So I moved on.
I've written over 150 papers, about half of which are on ancient calendars and ancient chronology. And for 10 years, I was the first science and religion editor for Meridian magazine.
Working full-time and filling his nights and weekends with writing and editing, Dr. Pratt still found time to devote to research. and found the Enoch calendar to be of particular interest.
Well, this Enoch calendar is really ingenious. Now, it only has 364 days. So at first blush, you say, wait a minute, that's not so clever. We know there's 365 and a quarter days in a year. Well, we have to correct it with leap days in our calendar. They corrected it with leap weeks. After about 5 years, you put in an entire extra week so that every year starts on a Sunday. You have all that practicality and usefulness, and it's every bit as accurate as the calendar we have.
364 is a pleasing number. It equals 52 weeks exactly. It allows for 4 seasons of precisely 13 weeks. But what about that extra day and a quarter every year? How does the Enoch calendar align with the true time it takes the Earth to circle the Sun?
The key to any calendar is intercalation, because the year does not have an exact number of days. So in our calendar, we have to add a leap day every 4 years, or sometimes even skip that. In the Enoch calendar, they intercalate this whole week. And Enoch was actually shown by an angel exactly how to do that.
The moon brings on all the years exactly, that their stations may come neither too forwards nor too backwards a single day, but that the years may be changed with correct precision in 364 days. The year then becomes truly complete according to the station of the moon and the station of the sun. The Book of Enoch, chapter 73, verses 13 and 16.
He's telling you that it's the moon that really governs when those extra 7 days are put in. That's super clever because it ties it to the Hebrew calendar. The Hebrew calendar emphasizes the moon with every month starting on a new moon. Enoch emphasizes the week with every quarter starting on a Sunday. That method of intercalation helps tie those two calendars together so they agree more often.
Dr. Pratt's understanding of the Enoch calendar is unparalleled. But it was when he applied that calendar to a prophecy found in the later chapters of the Book of Enoch that he discovered something truly remarkable.
Later in the Book of Enoch, he gives this prophecy where the entire history of the world is divided into 10 periods, which he calls weeks. This is a prophecy of the whole history of the earth, and if he talks about weeks, we should pay attention.
The Enoch calendar year begins on the first Sunday of spring. That is, the first Sunday after the vernal equinox, which falls on March 20th or 21st by our modern calendar. Because the year is 364 days, and each season is exactly 13 weeks, the first day of each year and each season falls on a Sunday. If, as the Old Testament tells us, the Lord sometimes counts years as days, we have a period of time known as an Enoch Great Year, 364 calendar years.
If you combine 2 of those great years of 364 years, you get a 728-year period. It really looks like that is what Enoch was talking about as a week. Because if you start from Adam and go on, it comes out perfectly, and you can match what he prophesied with what we know happened in history.
I have been born the 7th in the first week, while judgment and righteousness wait with patience. The Book of Enoch, chapter 92, verse 4.
Enoch tells you his own birth date in this prophecy, and I had already calculated his birth date from other factors, and it falls exactly where it said, so that was the date to check. He talks about the date of the flood, the date of the Exodus, the ministry of Christ. All of those line up exactly using the 728-year week. It turns out that the 8th week of the 10 in history ended in the year 1819.
Afterwards there shall be another week, the 8th of righteousness, to which shall be given a sword to execute judgment and justice upon all oppressors. Sinners shall be delivered up into the hands of the righteous, who during its completion shall acquire habitations by their righteousness. The Book of Enoch, chapter 92, verses 13 and 14.
when you look at what he prophesies for the 8th week, the righteous people are going to found an entirely new home. The sword will be used to free them from the injustice and from oppression. What is that in the late 1700s? That's the founding of America, which was a huge event in all of world history. It's a country unlike any other. So that's a match. Now, the 8th week ends in 1819. So what do we know that happened in 1820?
After this, in the 9th week, shall the judgment of righteousness be revealed to the whole world. The book of Enoch, chapter 92, verse 14.
When you look at the prophecy for the 9th week, it's that the judgment of righteousness will be revealed to the whole world. Judgment of righteousness, that sounds like a restoration of truth and righteousness, and it's going to be revealed to the whole world. I asked myself, can I use the Enoch calendar to maybe pinpoint it down to the very day of the first vision?
In the pattern of Enoch, each great year of 364 calendar years would be divided into great seasons, great weeks, and great days. That meant that 1820, the beginning of a new great year, would be a Sunday year, the first day of the great season of spring. But drilling down to the original Enoch year of 364 days, Dr. Pratt calculated the date more precisely. The 9th week prophecy of Enoch would begin on the first day of the calendar year. That is, the first Sunday after the vernal equinox. To Enoch, it would be the first day of spring, in a year that was itself the first great day of a great year.
Sunday, the 26th of March, 1820. That's the date of the first vision. It's a perfect fit. It's the first day of the Enoch year, and that whole year of 1820 was the first year of the great year of 364 years.
Dr. Pratt wrote an article describing his conclusions about the date of the first vision and published it to the world. But half a continent away, Dr. John Lefgren wasn't so sure.
I called him up and I says, I'm very impressed. I know who you are. I know that you calculate in a very careful way, and that Enoch had a lot to say about ancient and future things. I know how to test that date. I know where to get the weather record.
I heard that and I thought, whoa, I had no idea that there were weather records then, and that I could be proven wrong. And I had this little feeling in the pit of my stomach, like, what if it's wrong after all those things lined up? But I had to wait what he found, because he had access to real hard data.
There's the weather record from Sackett's Harbor, and there is the weather account found in the first-hand account of Joseph Smith. And the test is whether or not these two primary sources match up on March 26th.
There are 4 first-hand accounts of the first vision, each of them dictated by the prophet Joseph. And then there's several contemporary accounts, and you eventually get newspaper accounts, and no doubt the list will go on and on. But of those, there's only one account in 1838 that speaks anything about weather.
It was on the morning of a beautiful, clear day, early in the spring of 1820. Joseph Smith History, verse 14.
There's actually a lot of information in just that short passage. 1, it was morning. 2, the day was beautiful, which I take to mean, for that time of year, meant that it wasn't too cold. 3, the skies were clear. And 4, it was early spring. So you have to ask, what does early spring mean? I know that we often consider spring to start with vernal equinox, but in North America, from a purely meteorological standpoint, spring consists of March, April, and May. Early spring would be sometime in the first half of the season. So I would say anywhere from March 1st through April 15th.
John Lefgren determined to search Dr. Lovell's weather reports for Sackett's Harbor and focus on morning observations, those taken at 7 a.m. He would look for moderate temperatures above 40 degrees. He would make sure no clouds, rain, snow, or sleet were recorded, and he would confine his search to the first half of spring.
John told me that the weather data he had access to was taken at Sackett's Harbor on Lake Ontario, which is about 80 miles away. Well, how do we know that the weather was the same over in Sackett's Harbor as it was in Palmyra?
Sackett's Harbor is in upstate New York on the shores of Lake Ontario. Palmyra is about 80 miles to the southwest and generally shares the same weather and climate. Lake Ontario is huge and it tends to homogenize the whole area in terms of weather. So there's a fair certainty that the weather in Sackett's Harbor would align pretty closely with the weather in Palmyra.
I found an 1820 newspaper which had the first weather report ever printed in history. It included weather conditions from 17 military posts around the country. I created a chart showing the weather in the morning over a period of 45 days. The clear days are yellow, the overcast days are gray. The chart shows that there are 5 days in early spring of 1820 that satisfy the selection criteria. And of those days, there is one that stands out, Sunday, March 26, 1820.
So when he called and told me that March 26, 1820 was really a beautiful, warm, clear day, I breathed a real sigh of relief. And I think I said something like, "Yeah, I knew it all the time, John."
There are 5 days. One day is the best day, but the 4 days remaining are still in the running. It turns out that there is a way to make a selection of the one day based on the circumstances of the Smith family.
Joseph Smith Sr.'s family struggled economically. The Smith family were very involved in the sugar business. Some accounts will have them extracting enough maple sap and then boiling it down and making it sugar and coming up with as much as 1,000 pounds a year. We're talking not just 1 or 2 maple trees, but depending on who tells the story, it goes from 500 to 1,500. Obviously, it's not just a hobby for them. It's not a passing fancy. It's just, what should we do today? It's something very needed for their economic stability. They've got something to barter with.
Gary Cass has a New England heritage that stretches back generations. Intimately acquainted with the process of maple sugaring, he operates a family-owned maple syrup company in Vermont.
I log, I saw lumber. Maple syrup is the most labor-intensive thing I do, and that's with all the modern conveniences we have now. In the early 1800s, it would have been totally different. They would have spent many more hours just chopping wood and preparing and actually making the maple syrup. The trees dictate when the sap runs, and that dictates your life. You will make syrup when it runs, or you'll make sugar. The older groves, like the Smiths would have, I would assume would take 50 to 60 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup, which is 8 pounds of sugar. If I was trying for 1,000 pounds of maple sugar, we're talking probably 15 cords of good dry firewood. It's a long process that takes a lot of wood and a lot of time.
Joseph's mother says the family produced 1,000 pounds of maple sugar a year. That's a minimum of 500 trees to tap, 60,000 pounds of sap to collect, and 20,000 pounds of firewood to chop. Long, hard days for every member of the family. With such an arduous process, how could a farm boy of 14 take time off to go to a grove of trees alone and pray? A maple sap run is highly dependent on fluctuating temperatures, the seesaw of freezing and thawing. With this in mind, the producer showed the 1820 weather chart to Gary and asked his thoughts.
We're looking at the beginning of March. I see a spike up to about 40 degrees. They probably had a small run. Then we don't see much action again. It's 20 to 30. We need at least 35 to 40 degrees. We had a few runs in between around the 16th, the 21st had a pretty good run. And then we see the sun come out for about 3 days, and we see it up to 40 to 50 to 60 degrees. What I see there is some real runs, probably 400 to 500 gallons on that first day of the temperature, maybe on the second. By the third day, it wouldn't have run. We have to have a cold night, probably 20 degrees at minimum, and then at least 40 to 50 in the day to get a good run, and 60 is an excellent run. We rarely see it get cold that second night. We'll see a couple nights of cold, and by the third day, interestingly enough, it's 60 degrees up, but you won't get anything. It won't run.
So that third day was March 26th. It was a Sunday. Would
Okay.
it have been a day of rest then?
Well, at that time, this is in the early 1800s, and the Smith family was very religious. They would have done about anything they could do not to work on that day. Without the cold night, that third day, as warm as it was, they wouldn't have got a run. So yes, they would have taken that day off.
There is an 1843 account done by David Nye White of the Pittsburgh Gazette that talks about Joseph Smith's first vision. But in that account, he also shares that Joseph at one point left an axe in the stump of a tree. Could it have been the same week that the family was working hard out there in those woods to be able to get the maple ready and convert it into sugar? Perhaps.
It all makes sense. The weather report is clear. The Smith family was working hard for 7 days. Joseph Smith takes a day off. I called up John Pratt and I said, John, Enoch was right, and your calculation is right. The date of the first vision is March 26th.
It's the first day of the Enoch year. That year is the first year of a great year of 364 years. Everything fits perfectly. That was the day that opened the last dispensation.
Two men on two different paths, but two men on a single journey. Dr. John P. Pratt and Dr. John C. Lefgren. Different approaches, different methodologies, but one incredible conclusion. Young Joseph Smith, seeking personal forgiveness and struggling to know his path in life, wanting desperately to understand what his Lord would have him do. A mere boy, working the hardscrabble life of a farming family, just finishing an exhausting week of intense labor in maple sugaring. And finally, he gets a day off, a day when he can be alone. The Lord's Day, the Sabbath, a beautiful morning with clear blue skies.